During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long, until we eventually settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and we remained there until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes that we lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on a creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remain as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart I know they're real. You see, we lived in this house just outside of the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population of 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there, and in some ways it was just a waste of space. But it was the only house on the market at that time that was at least within an hour's commute from my father's workplace. The day after my 5th birthday, which was only attended by my parents, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It really was a horrible timing to be bedridden, since we were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania. Fortunately, most of my things were already packed in boxes, but that left my room barren. But my mother was ever kind, and she would bring me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth, because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears. He looked kind of like a Furby, I said as he was flipping through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look.
A Furby? What's a Furby?
I just shrugged. You know, the toy. The little robot with the big ears you can pet and feed them. Almost like a real pet.
Oh.
Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity.
You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend.
I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stepped by to check in on me.
I lay under your bed,
he later explained.
I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore.
We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face.
I have a new game we can play. We'll have to wait until after your mother comes to check on you because she can't see us play. It's a secret game.
After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under my bed and tugged my hand.
We have to go to the room at the end of the hallway,
he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me from leaving my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpapers. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flicking it open. Then he beckoned me to look out at the grounds below. We were on the 2nd floor of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was much further than 2 stories, due to that incline.
I like to play pretend up here. I pretend that there's a big, soft trampoline right below this window, and I jump. And if you pretend hard enough, you'll bounce back, up like a feather. I want you to try.
I was 5 years old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. But it's a long drop.
But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well just bounce on a real trampoline.
I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through the air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time. I don't think I have enough imagination for this. I might get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted in a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment.
If you say so.
He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box.
I want to teach you how to juggle,
He said.
Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons.
I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me. I was horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought a box of knives into my room. Objects my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. But he frowned.
It's fun to juggle with these. I just want you to try it.
But I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw around in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. And then I started having trouble sleeping. Mr. Widemouth would often wake me up at night saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one, but one that I couldn't see in the dark. Of course, I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth always persisted. Sometimes he would stay by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to
Jump.
He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came by me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers, trotted out to the back porch, and yearned for the feeling of the sun on my face. But Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me there.
I have something I want you to see.
I must have given him a weird look because he then added,
Oh, it's safe. I promise.
I followed him to the beginning of an old deer trail which ran through the woods behind our house.
This is an important path. I've had lots of friends about your age, and when they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day, I hope to take you there.
I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place could lay behind that trail. It was now 2 weeks since I met Mr. Widemouth, and the lost load of our things had finally been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps this creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he would say otherwise. So for this reason, I kept my departure a secret. And then my father and I, we entered the truck at 4 a.m. and we were hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? He asked. I nodded, placing my head against the window and hoped to get a bit of sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's strong hands on my shoulder. This is the last move, son. I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been, and once Daddy gets a promotion, we can settle down and you can finally make some friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway, and there, in my bedroom window, was a silhouette. It was Mr. Widemouth. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. Then he gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife still in his hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to the new vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burnt down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed that deer trail, the one Mr. Widemouth had shown me, and part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me. But I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone. Somehow I was sure he was tied to the house that no longer existed. And then I got to the end of the trail. New Vineyards Memorial Cemetery. And so many of those tombstones belong to children.